Thank you. Thanks to all the early risers for making it for the first paper. So my talk, as Steve said, is called the Burthen of her song. Burthen means a chorus, and it also means a burden, and both of them I think are relevant to women in the printing, singing and writing trade, probably still, but in the 19th century particularly. And I've also called it Glimpses of the Women, because really that's about all we get most of the time. We never really get a full picture of a woman. So women were writing, singing, selling and printing ballads in 19th century Ireland. But as I said, there's very little record of them, either on the broadsides or in the research. When they appear, even though they're described, they're often anonymous. And sometimes they're given a nickname, but unlike Zosimus, who everybody knows as Michael Moran, we have no idea who Ranting Sal, Warbling Biddy or Limping Kitty really are. So I'm going to start with the voices of the women on the street in the 19th century, as described by a few sample sources. And the first few are from the well-known Samuel Lover's Legends and Stories of Ireland from 1831. So he heard a woman singing on the street corner here in Mary's Abbey, an appropriate place for religious strains, he says. And the first couplet they heard was, Trana sobastana sia eashen, is the fate in which we do defend. And this fairly bothered us, he says, such a jawbreaker and peacebreaker as transubstantiation actually done into verse. So he says they ran off. This polysyllabic polemical gave us a distaste for any more controversial cantatas. Now, Lover is quoted from Horace there in the Latin, stating that something can't be rendered into verse. And yet it has been the word transubstantiation with many extra syllables to make it fit the song. I don't think this particular song has survived, but believe it or not, there is a song, at least one that survived in the tradition that has this jawbreaker in it. It's called The Banks of Dunmore, and it was recorded by Paddy Tunney in the 1970s, a song about a Protestant man trying to court a Catholic woman, and she tells him, if transubstantiation you believe in, you'll find it in the book of John. So anybody who wants to look that up will find it. Another description of a singer, and Samuel Lover, he's no stranger himself to jawbreakers, as he's giving out somebody else using them. Another ballad singer he references as a Patagonian fair one of the craft. Now, this woman is not from Patagonia. We think, or I think he means tall by the word Patagonian there. Patagonians were named originally for their height. So he says that this woman generally contrived to have a long chorus or burthen to her song. And when with some difficulty she picked her way through the articulation in each verse, it was very diverting to observe the complacency with which she dropped into the chorus and seemed to repose herself, as it were, upon its easy monotony, which ran thus. Consolar, a cone, a cone, a cone, consolar, a cone, and a cone, I-o. Consoler, a cone, a cone, a cone, and it's you that can stand alone, I-o. With apologies to whatever the real music of that song is. A third mention of a woman on the street, one owl dowager in particular, who wheezed out many a week's work in asthmatic praises of Richard Shiel and Daniel O'Connell, Esquires. But after the exertion of puffing out one line, she was obliged to pause for breath before giving the following one, and a comical effect was sometimes produced by the lapses. When she did come to the burthen of her song, she threatened with a significant shake of her head, which one eye and a bonnet both black and fiercely cocked rendered particularly impressive, that they had better take care about what they are at, for Shiel is the lad that will give them the chat with the Ballynamona-aroo, 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 brave Shiel and O'Connell for me. So it's clear from these descriptions, disparaging as they are, that there's a strong performative element to these women singing. In order not just to be heard, but to be noticed and stop people on their tracks on a street corner or at a fair, they use techniques that Lover makes fun of here. Unusual emphasis, pauses, embodying the song, shakes of the head, and the singer picking her way through the difficulties of articulation of each verse suggests distinct pronunciation, perhaps to render the words clear to the listening audience on one hearing. He also uses the word asthmatic in a jocular way, but this woman probably is suffering from asthma or emphysema exacerbated by the harsh life of the street. I'll finish my look at these performance elements with another commentator taking issue, this time a journalist. The song in question is In the Gloaming, a popular drawing room song, often sung as part of the James Joyce songbook, which Joyce plays with in Finnegan's Wake. One interesting thing about this song, it was written by two women, not of the street variety. Medda Orrid, a Scottish-born woman who grew up mostly in India, wrote the words, and Anna Fortescue Harrison, Lady Arthur Hill, an English lady, wrote the music. But it took to the streets, as you will hear. The female ballad singers have taken to their affections the song In the Gloaming by Lady Arthur Hill. It is rather disillusioning to hear the ballad under such conditions, though it's unquestionably a tribute to its popularity. The first sounds are heard at a distance, first fainter, then louder as it draws nearer, the words long drawn out and feeling conveyed by dwelling on some particularly unexpected note. Sometimes the singer betrays her nationality by rendering the endearing epithet my darling. So as you probably know the song, it goes, in the gloaming, oh my darling. But obviously the street singers are singing, oh my darling, and that gives it a proper street sound. So the journalist is kind of having it every way here, both damning and praising the popular taste. But again, we inadvertently get that real sense of performance of the song and the my darling, not just the vernacularization of the phrase, but the idea of the words being drawn out and the effect created by dwelling on unexpected note. What the journalist is giving us is an insight into the very stylized way in which street singers captured and kept their audiences with a series of calculated techniques. And just evidence of the song having gone out into the street. This is a little songbook, very cheap songbook from Nugent Publishers. That's just the banner at the top of it, and there's the page where In the Gloaming is in the bottom centre, and then a Scottish broadside with In the Gloaming, obviously not credited at all to the women who wrote it. That ladies rather than common women of the street were worthy of a credit, albeit an anonymous one in this case, is evidence from the broadside we see here, coyly credited to a lady of Waterford. I think we can be sure this is someone of a higher class, the drawing room class, than the street women, and especially when her song has a chorus of Derry Down, an unusual one to find in a song praising O'Connell because of its very English sound. So she's one of the this is a very typical song praising O'Connell, of which there were hundreds and thousands at the time. This one is actually from the Madden collection at Cambridge. It'd be difficult to find it online, but they kindly gave me a copy. So the Lady of Waterford sounds unlikely to have been frequenting any street poets club in Dublin, but those women who were there with Sadler, Zondermus and friends are as elusive as she is. This is a reminiscent from The Irish Builder, a magazine of 1873, written by Dublin's oldest inhabitant. That was the anonymous name of the writer. And it gives us a fascinating glimpse, I think, into the community of poets at the time. They met twice a week. Sorry.
Okay. There seemed to be an issue with the slide showing for the remote people. But,
oh, that's okay.
It looks like it's
all right, sorry. So they met twice a week, none but those who catered for the public taste in sheet and book almanacs and such like literature were allowed to push their noses inside the sacred sanctum of the back parlour in Crossbones Street. There doesn't seem to be a real street named that, but I think it's a nickname for a street around St. Audwin's where there was a crossbones over the gate. This rendezvous was well known to the immortal Zosimus, Blind Sadler, Ranting Sal, Limping Kitty, Leather-lunged Larry, and Warbling Biddy. These singers, according to whatever subject was in the preparation suitable to their vocal powers, were called in for a consultation with the poets and their publisher. If a criminal was under sentence of death, to swing at Kilmainham or Newgate, there was, of course, an absolute necessity for a lamencolly effusion. The last dying declaration was to be properly wetted down and moulded into shape, and a most tender, come all ye Christian hearts. If the member for Ballyragget or Ballyjamestuff successfully bearded the Saxon minister in the House of Parliament, this was the signal for a heroic infusion with a thrilling chorus. Paddy's Evermore was revived with variations, or the antique Lily Valera Booling on Law. So it sounds a fascinating club, but Sadly, we don't know who those women who are taking part in it were. We do know that 2 of the 3 men mentioned, leather-lunged Larry, I still don't know who he is, but maybe we'll find out. One of the women we can name who was singing on the streets of Dublin around the 1850s is Mary Madden from Limerick, a source of songs and tunes in Irish for George Petry's Ancient Music of Ireland, 1955. Petry didn't speak Irish, so it was Eugene O'Curry who translated and transcribed the songs for him from Madden. The only description we have of her is that she was a poor, blind woman from Limerick. That is it. And everywhere you look, that's all we know. The male equivalent, you could say, of Madden, who was Tig McMahon, who was from Clare, has come down with us with a lot more of his background information, his family, his working life, and all that kind of thing. What's especially maddening, if you forgive the pun about Madden, is that it would be hugely enriching to have background on the songs she gave to the tradition. One of these wonderful songs is on Ban Uad Heath, sometimes known as Seo Hu Lo. The song is ostensibly a lullaby, but sung by a woman who's been abducted by the fairies to nurse their babies. She's singing a lullaby to the fairy child, but between the Seo Hu Lo lullaby lines, she's addressing a woman she can see outside, telling her about her plight, about other captives in the magnificent fairy palace, and urging her to get her husband to come up with a wax candle in his hand and get her out before a year and a day is up. It's clear that Petry and O'Curry weren't interested in the source of the songs. They were interested in the songs and the tunes themselves. But it's a tragic lost opportunity to think of the wonderful wealth of folklore that that woman would have had around those songs and the fairy beliefs and superstitions that have been lost for want of asking. Sticking with a little bit of Irish, I've been in the archives. I think Steve was there yesterday in the Comisiún Ballad Éireann in the Irish Folklore Archives in UCD, where I'm studying at the moment. And this is a piece of, or an anecdote taken down from a woman in 1937, Breed New Worry. She was aged 85 at the time, and she's a farmer's wife from the townland in Kiltartan in County Galway. And the anecdote is in Irish, but she uses English when she's talking about a ballad singer who's in the town. I'll just read a tiny bit of the Irish, but I will then just translate, just to give you the sense of it. Timple an tam céanna bías ag an ngortlaw, agus connig me an calling but ballad singer a bhí inte, agus I a goal she's an shráid agus a rá áron. Pair down fukla a vis an auron near haig sé leis an bílar mór seo vir duty an. And there we have the word duty in English. I've also had the word license in English before, in an entirely Irish text. So these authoritarian words, they just don't come naturally to the Irish, and they are used in English. So she's saying around the same time, and that's around 1880, the early 1880s, due to the anecdote before, I was at Girth, which is a local town, and I saw the poor girl, a ballad singer, who was there going down the road singing a song. Whatever words were in the song, the local peeler who was on duty didn't like them. So I remember well that these were the words she sang. We'll all be together when the champion potatoes grow. Champion potatoes took off in Ireland in the early 1880s because there had been a potato blight in 1879. Not as bad as the potato famine, but it affected people, and the champion potato was from Scotland was resistant. So it's a very innocuous song about the champion potatoes, but the policeman didn't like it. He went up and gave her a poke of his gun and told her to stop singing. You damn rascal, she said, if you did that to me in my own county Tipperary, your bones would be broken, which is a rather feisty thing to say. So policeman just poked you with his gun, I would have thought. But anyway, so I think it just shows, but at the same time, oh, is that gone?
That's right. Just that screen.
Oh yeah. I think it shows just the capriciousness with which women were treated, ballad singers generally were treated on the streets. And this is just a selection of the kind of things. There are thousands of court cases, thousands of mentions of ballad singers in the courts. So here we have people, an editorial just saying this woman should be jailed because we think she's singing something decent and moral. Somebody who's gets a month in jail, somebody who gets a week in jail, somebody is happy to get a week in jail because she thought she'd get longer. More of the same, ballad singers arrested, and they were found not to be treasonable, but they still had to spend some time down in the police station and probably got their ballads taken off them. if often ballad singers, women are portrayed with the child in their arms. When the child was older, you had to take them with you. Then you were accused of encouraging the child to beg. If you left the child at home, you were accused of child desertion. So you really didn't have it either way when you were a woman ballad singer on the street. No wonder the pressures on women singers often drove them to desperate situations. There's often child killing episodes. These are two examples of attempted suicides by ballad singers in police cells, one in Cork and one in Belfast, in County Down. And then obviously there was a charge for suicide at the time as well. In fact, the only sense of kindness to ballad singers from the authorities that I've come across is this one incident of a woman who collapsed in the street in Dunleary. In the main street, probably looks very similar to this at the time, Lower Georgia Street, a very busy street in Dunleary still. And she collapsed about 40 years of age, found lying in a state of complete insensibility on the road. And she was brought to the doctor, who said she'd had a severe attack of epilepsy aggravated by the hardships and privations she'd endured. She was a wandering ballad singer without a home, going from town to town. So we just get a sense of just the difficulties of the lives of these women. But some women did get away with it, and one of them was Monica Healy, who was the sister of a priest called Father James Healy. They came from a big family in Francis Street, and he eventually became the celebrated curate, a parish priest of Little Bray in Wicklow. And there's a memoir written about him by one of his friends, William Fitzpatrick, in 1895, where he tells about all his great wit and raconteurs. They don't date that well, I have to say. But he had a younger sister, Monica, and as it says here rather floridly, a woman of great natural gifts whose auburn hair curtained features which revealed traces of Celtic beauty. She could throw off without effort gems of poetry. So Monica published anonymously a book of devotional poetry, Legends of the Saints in verse. And she also wrote a song called The Devil Among the Supers, among other songs, but we don't know what the other ones are. So The Devil Among the Supers is really an interesting song. And that became an anonymous broadside on the streets of Dublin, an extremely popular one, which is mentioned in the letters of Dr. Paul Cullen, Cardinal Paul Cullen, and lots of other people. It is often mentioned in street conditions. It's to the air of Billy O'Rourke's The Book, which is a very, very popular air for broadside ballads. So I'll give you a little bit of it. Some time ago in the regions below there was fear and consternation, for heresy fast was losing its grasp on the holy Irish nation. So the imps of sin were all gathered in a meeting most hideous and hateful, to try and devise by scheming and lies some way to seduce the faithful. Good people all, both great and small, smiths, carpenters and coopers, did you ever hear tell of the council of hell and the devil among the supers? So the supers were the people, the Irish church missions usually, who tried to convert the Irish, allegedly with soup kitchens, and indeed with soup kitchens. There was one in the Coombe, and so Monica got away with this song going out into the world on an anonymous broadside, but the singers of the song were not so lucky. Here's one man, this time Martin Power. He was charged with creating a disturbance by singing ballads of a seditious and offensive nature, and it says they were embellished with pictorial caricatures. This is a lovely little woodcuts they're talking about there, and were of a very gross and inflammatory character, especially one entitled The Devil Among the Supers. 1 month's imprisonment or a fine was the sentence of the magistrate. So poor old Martin Power got nailed for singing the priest's sister's song, The Devil Among the Supers. So I have little to say about the printers because I have spent a lot of time on the other people, but I have looked at some of the printers, and I know John Molden is here, has done really fantastic work on the ballad in general in Ireland, and including some of the women who were printing at the time. The printers of ballads in Ireland were the wives, widows, and daughters of male printers, and they usually, maybe they helped when the husbands were alive, but they certainly took over often when the husband died. Here's just one sample of Catherine Haley here at 64 Hanover Street there. She's the only woman listed among all these male printers, the Richards and Johns and Brothers and Williams and Francises, in this list of letterpress printers in Cork in 1856. And it seems that she took over her husband's business in 1847. Well, certainly I have his death note is in 1847, 30th of January. So that's probably when she took over. But we think she was his daughter, Catherine Haley. She's never referred to as Mrs. Haley. And that's probably significant, I think. But I think in a final sort of nail in the coffin of women being identified in the trade, the death notice of his wife, which, sorry, I meant to keep that up. And the death notice of his wife in 1825 in the Dublin Morning Register doesn't mention her name at all. Just says she died Mrs. Haley, wife of Mr. Joseph Haley, gets his name in printer, but she doesn't even get her first name in, so we don't know what her first name was. And I think that's really telling of the way that women are treated at the time, and they're kind of just related to the men, and there isn't really, you know, a lot of detail about them. So I know I'm getting 2 minutes here from Stephen, but I'm going to be very, very good and finish early because I know we started a little bit late. So if anybody would like to have any questions, I'm happy to take them now, or you can have them after. Joe.
How are you? Thanks a million, Catherine. It's lovely to hear them. Just a note on one of the papers that you showed, the majority seem to be from the north that were charging the singers.
Yeah, well,
I might be wrong on the.
Yeah, no, there are quite a few from the north. You're right, but I think they probably were just more assiduous in in reporting them, because sometimes it's very hard to find. You know, they're very tiny little. They're very tiny little court cases sometimes, you know, and you don't often get them unless there's a celebrated case, which were almost all by men, with men at the centre of them, when there's a big furore and Dublin Castle is involved, and there's, you know, back and forths with printers and ballad sellers and where you got this and all that kind of thing. So, you know, they're often very, very short, and I think, yes, for some reason there seems to be more of them reported in the northern papers. I don't know why that is. There were more northern papers. Yes, Harry would be able to tell us.
Just a comment, Catherine.
Yes.
Yeah, just where you mentioned that the woman was sorry she didn't get longer in prison.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's still the truth. You will still have people, and women particularly, handing themselves back into Mountjoy at Christmas, particularly. Still not just much more. So we're very near. Just a challenge, really. Sorry, it just struck me very important when it came up. Very, very funny. Sorry, I interrupted.
No problem. Sorry, Steve.
In the quote you had from the UCD,
yes,
manuscript, where she put ballad singers in English, was there no word for ballad singers in Irish?
There would have been a word, but I don't think it was that. I think it was that this woman was English speaking. She was an English ballad, you know, she was an Irish woman from Tipperary, but she was obviously, for some reason, maybe she used the word in English because the woman did her business in English, and I don't know, because she uses the poor girl in Irish, and it may be that the poor girl people understood that to mean a ballad singer for some reason. I have no idea, but I don't think you would have Aroniac. You'd have some word for singer in Irish, but I don't know why she didn't use it. It's interesting.
There was a phrase, sorry, just come in on that. There was a phrase that was used. I know that Free McGlynn spoke about was a travelling singer called John Martin, and he used to travel to Armore Island, and there was a name that the people like John that were given. I can't remember what it was now, but it was something like, I don't want to like make something up on the spot, but there was a word that was used. I'll be able to track it down and send it on there.
A word in Irish, you mean?
Yeah, an Irish language words to describe people who travel around, kind of maybe not just simply for street singers, but the people in
But there's schulers, they use, even in English, they use the word schulers, like walkers. And Luxschuls are traveling people, but often they would have said the Luxschuls, the traveling people came singing, that I've seen that. Oh, Bakok, yeah, or Bakok, yeah. I've heard that.
So, but I'd have to just get it straight for you. Yeah.
I think a Bakok is kind of like or disreputable sort of person, isn't it? Maybe lame, yeah.
It's had to kind of that image of kind of people going around. They could be doing anything. They could be selling, you know,
Peddlers or
peddlers. Could be peddling songs. It could be peddling stuff they made or whatever. Yeah.
sure.
There's one more
Yes,
question.
Jerry.
Just a quick one, Catherine. So did some research on the Blackbird Suite on Dale, and in Martin Shannon's book, Ballad from the TSF spoiled the president of Fanny Parnell. So I went into the National Library and I scrolled through all of the copies of the Wicklow people and the Wexford people and the newsletter and stuff like that. And it does appear 1882. It appears in the Wicklow people, but there's no accreditation to it of Ballyfarnell, but it seems to be general. So maybe the reason why it wasn't accredited is because of the fact that it was maybe seditious.
Well, I think that's probably the case with the devil among the supers. You wouldn't want your name to that. But yeah.
There's an online question.
Okay.
John Baxter on the chat says, do you come across much by the poet Eliza Cook printed in Ireland?
I haven't yet, but I don't know if John might be able to answer that. If you heard of Eliza Cook, poet?
Sorry?
Eliza
Cook.
Eliza
Cook.
I've heard of her, but I know nothing whatsoever. Nothing comes to mind, but
I think,
Yeah.
I think she was an American poet, and I mean quite popular. I think there are quite a lot of her works on broadsides, either sometimes attributed to her and sometimes anonymous. But yeah, I mean, I think if you did a search for her, you'd turn up an awful lot.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's just men who get or aren't named on the ballots. For instance, Thomas Moore would have a lot of songs, I think, that went into broadsides. I don't necessarily think his name would be on all of them. So I think it's not entirely just women that didn't have the
John is noting that she was chartist.
Oh, yeah.
And not American, says Oscar. And she wrote Teddy O'Neill.
Oh, that's a great song. Yeah, great song.
Susan Rutherford is doing great work on her at the moment, says Oscar. Oscar also has a question for you.
Okay. Hi, Oscar.
The quickest question in the world.
And I run off then.
What next for you, given the paucity of sources? Are you contemplating creative ways to get around the fact that the actual traces are only glimpses of these women singers?
I am hopeful that there's a lot more in the Folklore Commission. I've only got to scrape the surface there, and it's not terribly well indexed. A lot of them are now online, but not all of them have been transcribed, so they're not searchable online. So I'm using an old card index in the Folklore Commission, and I'm gradually making my way through the Auroniacs there, the singers, and female singers and that. So, you know, it's a slow process, but more and more stuff also has been digitized, and just as Oscar would know, probably makes things a little bit easier. Both memoirs, not just broadsides themselves, but all sorts of writing about the time, about the 19th century. Who am I telling?
One very fast one is the champion potatoes were referred to, and still are. I grew them this year. Land leaguers. So they're Irish heritage seeds. They're known as, yeah. So in fact, the champion stands for potato, stands for innocence.
Fair. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. That's great.